Okay, so everyone, welcome to our 15th video session. Today we're going to be discussing how to solve the MIT Solve Challenge and how can citizens and communities create and improve social inclusion and shared prosperity. Also, because it's Food Wastage Reduction Month, we are aiming to submit an idea that aims to reduce food wastage as well as solve this challenge for MIT Solve. So our friend Puya, can you raise your hand? All right, great. He is going to be managing the managing part of this session as he works with NewsTube in bridging cultural and social barriers through food and sharing and conserving meals. And then Roger, can you raise your hand as well? Okay, great. So Roger is going to be working on the execution part of this, and he's going to use the software Trello to ultimately show how we can solve this challenge and take it from the brainstorming phase to the execution phase. And then everyone else, we're just going to give our feedback and then refine this idea so we can submit this solution to MIT Solve. So that's just a little bit of what we're going to be discussing today. Let's go through introductions really quickly. I'm Shivani, one of the co-founders of Impaction. Puya, do you want to go next?
Sure. Puya, the co-founder and CEO of NewsTube.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anand.
Hi, I'm Anand, and I work as a data scientist for NASDAQ.
Cool. Roger.
I'm Roger, and I'm founder of IdeaTrack, and there we go.
Okay. Maribel, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm Maribel. I'm a Brooklynite with lots of love for immigrants and also creative love for immigrants, and I'm teaching social entrepreneurship through LearnServe International.
Heck yeah. Awesome. And then Tanvi.
Hi, I'm Tanvi. I work as a product manager with Impaction, and I'm based in Boston.
Cool. And then Sukanya, can you try again?
Yes, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Sukanya and I'm a graduate student at New York Institute of Technology.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, as I said, we're going to be talking about the MIT Solve Challenge. And in order to do this, I just wanted to give a brief introduction of what this MIT Solve Challenge really is. But ultimately, we are concentrating on submitting this solution on how citizens and communities create and improve social inclusion and shared prosperity. So for this, ultimately, we have to submit a challenge by July. And they don't have to be fully refined solutions, or we don't have to create a prototype or anything like that. We just have to ultimately submit an idea. So anyone with a solution to this challenge has to apply by July 1st. And ultimately, we can win more than $725,000 in prize funding based off of what niche we're trying to cover in this MIT Solve Challenge. There have been teams that have already submitted their solutions, and these are teams that have tech platforms or social media platforms that are targeting refugee populations and even access to water to prevent cholera or disease outbreak. So for our particular challenge today, we're going to be talking about food wastage reduction. And for this, we asked Puya and NewsTube to introduce themselves and ultimately share their ideas just to get us started for today. So Puya, I'm going to give it to you. And why don't you introduce a little bit what you're doing and what your idea is right now.
Sure. Thank you, Shivani, and thank you, folks. It's an honor, and what I'm also sharing with you is a perspective more than anything else for your review and customization, Roger, and how you think it would be applicable. So NewsTube was started about a few years ago. I was at a Christmas dinner, and the hosts and hostess were of Afghan heritage, and I come as a refugee. We left during the Iran-Iraq War and came to the U.S. So I love that whole melting pot aspect of it. And people there were from different, diasporas and such. And when we went ahead and had our first servings, the seconds, and over a chai to thank this matriarch, ends up she's the last royal chef to the King of Afghanistan. So it really blew me away. And when people are saying, are you a chef or you a foodie? I say I'm a sentimental guy, because then, these things be passed on to family members. So the premise of NewsTube is help folks capture and preserve their kitchen's history. As progression of NewsTube goes on, and we try to work and think through that process and make it less textural, because we cook with our, with utensils and such. My mom came to visit when we had our son, and my wife, who Shivani, I introduced via email, she's an environmental scientist. She's been in charge of the whole national climate resiliency for all the tribes, and she was with EPA for 7 years. So she's got a lot of, conservationist friends. And the video that I shared with Shivani is a friend of hers, Matt, that these guys literally go, as they call it, dumpster diving, and they go basically save food that's not, it's still rescue food. Rachel, come on in and talk, by the way, to rescue food. And she's like chirping in the background. She's actually the brains. And what was interesting is, my mom was here. She cooked all these really good, home cooked foods and stuff for us. And her friends were having this party for this rescued food, which was fascinating for me, because then here I am, and my wife is trying to be the right, the proper daughter-in-law, and I'm trying to translate to my mom, come and help, and I don't know how else to say, come and eat garbage, basically, in a way, because this is rescue food, right? And it's still good food and what have you. And my mom's like, no, that's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and have the leftovers that I made you guys from last night and what have you. The premise and the reason that I'm sharing this is because it's our cultures are actually, if we go revert back to the origins of what we do and stuff, is we cook from recipes, and those recipes have ingredients in them. When we cook in our family, you cook to the last basically ingredients, and even the bread that was left, you would give it to the birds and all those kind of different things like that. So nothing went to waste. So by the time something went into the garbage, it really was trash. Where you take that and bring it to the Western side, and what we're actually used to having. Hi, Baba. Do you want to come up? When you come to the Western side, it's all packaged foods and things that are cans and what have you. So when we actually go ahead and cook outside of a recipe, you're actually wasting a lot of those things that are in those packaged foods and preservatives and all that. So in a way, if there's a way to figure out, when you cook from a list, from a recipe ingredients list, how are you literally actually lowering that waste? And you're not bound by a package or a can or things that are just kind of brought on. And that's what my mom does when she cooks by these recipes that we have. You're not getting anything into waste, and you're also having seconds, and those ingredients are actually for other dishes that you can use. So it's kind of going back to your roots, in the sense, and doing it the reason, because it might be kind of the cool thing to go ahead and cook from and try to save food based on like the burritos or the bread or whatever that was tossed into the Trader Joe's or Whole Foods or whatever else. But there's another way in the psyche where our parents actually did it. They did it for the reason that resources were scarce, things would go bad a lot sooner, and you had to go ahead out of necessity do that. And if you look at the video that I shared with you of Matt in the NewsTube, he talks about his Hungarian, for example, grandmother, and how they would also preserve things on the farm or in the cities where they were at. And that was actually out of necessity. So there is a bridge, and the thought process on this is, the solution is, if we go back to our parents and our family members and our patriarchs and matriarchs and go over how they basically cook with these recipes and such, you will actually talk about what's the word? How waste kind of went away and wasn't into the packages. So sorry, I went on about that, but that is basically it. It's capturing and then those ways they did it. Rachel does it in a way. She's my wife's Navajo heritage, and when you go to the tribes of, for example, and the various elders, they talk about that as well. So it's nothing new. I think this rescuing food or food waste is actually goes back to our ancestors and our heritage. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does, and I think you touched on a point that none of us really, well, at least I don't really think about when it comes to food waste reduction. Especially like when we're following recipes, everything seems relatively crisp. And then if you want to follow a recipe, you usually get the ingredients according to the specific quantity, and you don't really think about the consequences of that afterwards. So I think you touched on an interesting point. And if anyone has like ideas or like wants to talk about this as well, just feel free. But yeah, I think we can like jumpstart this, and I think Maribel, you were starting to say something, so I'll put myself on.
I was. So I actually was looking up some existing tech solutions, and it was interesting because one that caught my eye is doing exactly what you're trying to say, Puya, and getting to the root of the issue, which is the way we think about food when we're starting to cook and when we don't have the full ingredients. And there's this app I saw called My Food Waste, which helps people reduce their food waste. They click or they include the food that they actually do have, and the app generates a recipe, a new recipe that they probably wouldn't have come up on their own. So I think people find that useful.
Yeah, and actually one of the things was we wrote it was kind of a brainstorm a while back, is kind of my pantry and what do I have in it. I have cilantro, cumin, I have some meats and whatever else. And to your point, what can I make with this versus to go to waste? And these are based on, to your point, exactly. And then to the site is these are recipes. And we have these, and then there's a two-part to that is I actually want to preserve that, my mom's or dad's or these folks' recipes in our families. And while you're doing that, I guess in the background, if there's a way to see how much actually you're saving, and versus just going out and buying something canned or outside or whatever else. So, no, thank you for sharing that. It's very interesting. I forgot about that actually.
I think just in terms of transitioning and like working with the saving aspect, I do want us to think about the actual MIT Solve challenge, right? So the question is, how can citizens and communities create and improve social inclusion and shared prosperity through food waste reduction? I want to bring us back to that, so we stay focused on that.
So aren't you kind of doing that by socially including other folks in your journey of trying to reduce food waste? When you go ahead and bring others onto, because if I go out and I say I'm going to go ahead and reduce food waste, okay, that's great. But how do I translate that into the norm of my surroundings or my circles or my family? And by saying, so tell me, Auntie, how did you go ahead and make the following, and how do you save? Because the thing is, food waste in the Western world, lack of a better terminology and framing, and I apologize if I'm in a broad brushstroke, is we go to the grocery store and it's cans or vegetables or things like that on there. And I remember as a kid growing up, when we went out to the market to get food, you physically couldn't touch certain produce that was like, back or front, because the vendor would say, oh, you can't touch it, you can't pick and choose, because you want to get the more freshest thing that are available. And in a way too is where you had, and that's what they did. That's what our families did is and if we try to learn from their best practices, and then how they went about doing it. I think so. There's have you heard about that? The lady who had that one paper that It preserves food for you. Have you heard about that? It's called. I'll find it. I'll email it. But not to take up time here. But basically, she goes back to India, and she drinks the water, and then her auntie gives her this little elixir with some of the herbs and stuff that she has, and she found out that actually that also preserves the food as well. And she had a big run in DC and other places, and she now provides that paper as a way to preserve food in the DC food banks actually. But it literally came from an ingredients that her auntie actually used, based on the way they preserve food in their back home in their family. Sorry, I'll be quiet, guys. I'm talking.
No, I mean that we asked you to, so it's no problem at all.
But me and Tanvi were discussing a solution which was like he told that people would really go and take stuff that are good from a dumpster truck. So we were thinking of a medium or an app that we could create that would actually not let people put it in the dumpster truck, but give it directly to people in the food bank or something like that, so that they don't have to really go and scavenge, and basically just promote or motivate people to look carefully through their pantry and just brainstorm on, am I really going to use this in the next 2 months? I know this is going to get expired. This is a lot for me. I should probably donate. So me and Tanvi were brainstorming on this idea. So like Tanvi, if you could just go ahead and explain the reward system, that would be really good.
So what we were thinking was an app wherein if I am the person who is donating the food, I can just open the app, scan the barcode of the item that I'm deciding to donate. Let's assume it's a packet of cereal, and it is a very fancy cereal that I thought would be really cool to try, but I was kidding myself. I would never try that because I don't have the time, or for whatever reason. So while scavenging through the pantry, I see, okay, fine, it's still not expired. I take a snapshot of the barcode. The app scans the barcode, takes in all the information, like what the product is, its ingredients, and its expiration date. And then if from a particular area, if there are, for example, 10 or 20 items, 20 people who are donating one item each, so there are like 20 items at least, then we as a company or as a purveyor of donated food, we can set up a pickup. If not, then that person can themselves drop the food items off at a location that we can provide them with. And once we get all that donated food, we can give that to food banks or even co-ops that are literally looking for good food, which they in turn turn into recipes that they give to people who need them, right? But to incentivize people to donate more and not just throw it away, or to be mindful about what they have, we can give them virtual coupons or virtual money. So depending on how far away from the expiration date the item is, like how fresh the item is, we can give them a number of coupons or a number of virtual money, which they can then redeem to buy more organic stuff. So we can partner with these organic food companies who do not have many buyers in the first place, because it can be a little expensive. People don't know much about it, and they can post their items on our app or website or whatever platform we provide them with. And the people who donate, who get the virtual money or the virtual coupons, can redeem a certain amount off of certain bill that they buy the stuff for. So in turn, we are boosting more organic produce. We are incentivizing people to donate fresher food, like be really mindful and proactive about it instead of being just reactive. And we give it to people who actually need it. So we are closing in on the circle.
Yeah, the whole aim was also to target those people. Let's say I got some spice for a recipe and I'm not going to use half of it because I've made it months. So it will promote people to also do all of those used things which other restaurants or food banks can perfectly use. So that is like, it basically acts as a perfect mediator between what the food banks are really missing is to have such a delivery system, or in some way have these inputs, because they now have to go and scavenge through. And a lot of, like, even through scavenging through dumpsters is good. Still, a lot of food gets wasted because it was put in an area that's like, or inside a dumpster that was really bad. And even though the food was good, you cannot really use it.
Yeah, because we thought initially of giving it directly to people who need it the most, people suffering from food insecurity, homelessness, etc. But these co-ops or these food banks already have a network of homeless shelters or people who really need it, right? So why not we give it to them so that they save money on buying actual stuff and they actually prepare nutritious food out of whatever materials they get and give it to them.
How would you take away the liability for that? For example, like anybody gets sick and things like that, for people that get sued. So someone.
So the food bank would do it for us, right? As we would give them the margin enough to do this verification from us.
You mean that they would look at the expiration date on the
So we would look at the expiration dates on our own, but so the expiration date filter would already be done from the platform itself. But let's say if the oats itself have really gone bad, even though they are not from the expiration date or not, we are expecting the kitchen owners or the cooks inside these co-ops to look at the ingredients before really using it.
I see. And then certain things, like, for example, let's say, to your point, where like spices or oats, things like that, that they can go ahead and vet it. But certain things like, let's say, poultry or meats, maybe they need to be a little more, those would be put aside for safety reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then we can also set up rules saying that, like, if the poultry is not like within 3 days or 4 days, we would not take it.
Mm-hmm.
And have strict guidelines with respect to food that's degradable in a short period of time versus food that can be like flour. I know I have a 5 kg of flour that I'm not going to use. It's going to expire in the next 6 months. I would rather donate it.
Sure. You know what's also interesting too, from a dietary or health standpoint, kind of that cycle of it. The stuff that these guys would also get, these EPA friends, a lot of junk food, you know, and things that also get thrown away. And what I liked about what you said is the ingredients. So also, if you have the recipes that go with it, you're also getting into the health psyche of it too. Is look at the following dishes that you can make that are healthy with the following ingredients that we have available. And also, maybe I'm trying to think out loud, is if you brought on certain spices and herbs that you can apply to some of these foods with via a recipe that would provide the health benefits versus, you know, take the Oreos or, you know, or something, you know, just preservatives and a lot of sodium. Where that the recipe also, we give you that recipe of how to make it as well, in a healthy fashion too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that because
kind of roll forward.
Because the probability of me throwing an ingredient is way more than the probability of me throwing Oreos. That is what I witnessed from our from the 3 monthly or quarterly cleaning that we've done. Is like, I did not throw that many chips or drinks or something like that. The main ingredient that I really threw was there were a lot of ingredients like rice or something else or grains or something that I did not use. They went bad, and I was like, I knew, I remembered it. I bought it for some recipe, and I did not make it. And I'm like, oh shit, now I've lost it.
So you have your mama's at your house too, sounds like. When we open up our pantry, she comes here, she buys half the store, the Persian store, and then it's like it's taped up there. And I wish, this is the idea, what we're talking about, what's in my pantry, is I wish I had something that I can go and apply to it, because then it just sits there. And you're like, dude, you have a lot of spice. I'm like, yeah, but I don't know what to do with them. But if there was a way I could have those recipes and I could apply to things like meat or chickens versus getting the Mexican food, I'm gonna get my mom's food. So I feel that.
But yeah, and we could also prototype this solution pretty quick with respect to the MIT Innovation Challenge and things like that. This solution can be very easily prototyped, in the form of an app. We could also have something have a sort of a Uber thing where we could also show the nearest dropout things. if someone's really coming to pick it up, we could also partner with Uber drivers. Like you could basically expand it to a lot, like in a lot of different ways and scale it.
And even on the inclusion side, so the problem not the problem, one aspect of it which I feel we are leaving out is the fact that a lot of cooked food, someone made some kind of a curry, that food gets wasted too. It's not just dry ingredients, right? So, but as you said, Puya, mothers, grandmothers, they know how to convert even cooked food into something else. Like my mom does it every time. They take already cooked curry and then use it in something else, and you can't even know that it was curry before. So it's basically new, but made of something, made of leftovers. So maybe to close in on that as well, we can do what Google or YouTube does. The power of personally created content from users. So what if we also ask or encourage women, especially from different cultures, who are homeowners, homemakers, housewives,
offering employment to women's and moms and getting them to ultimately donate their cook food to for this app. I think that's what she was going at. Tanvi?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
There we go.
Where did I lose you guys?
Offer employment, women and moms, bringing them in.
Yeah, and have them create recipes or send in the recipes themselves, and we can show that too.
That's a very interesting point. The last furlough that we went through in DC, there was a lot of obviously federal employees and contractors that went without basically the income. My wife's a federal employee, also she got furloughed. But there's a lot of folks that really were dependent on that income and no savings and mortgage and all that. So a lot of these food banks really saw a spike in need and things like that. What I'm wondering, Tanvi, based on what you're saying, is my mom will go ahead and turn that into another dish and so on. Maybe another way, part of that inclusion maybe is to bring that on and saying, well, here's my mom or auntie or whoever it is recipe that you can also apply to this food. So you're also giving that love and that care with it, not only along with how to make the following, but you're also elevating that person's status and saying, here's auntie, or here's my mom's recipe that you can also apply toward the following. So beside the utility, you're also showing some care in that inclusion possibly factor. I don't know, just thinking out loud, because you're right. My mom too, she'll make something and how does she turn it into 3 different dishes? But that's part of our process, and we're coming on this side, the millennials, of trying to solve these challenges, but they've done it all this time. And if we kind of bring that bridge, and to your folks' point about, okay, well, don't throw it away, give it to the food banks for folks to go and do that. And here's a recipe that comes from love from auntie, whatever. I know I work with refugees out in Lesbos, and we used to get a lot of clothing from different parts of the world, or toys or whatever else. And the ones that were really touching that had that handwritten note attached to them. And someone weaved it or made it, whatever else. And when you give it to that family, and then also if they didn't speak English, you translate it. But that handwritten note or that message was also an elevating factor that you're also cared and loved, and we see you as an individual, not a donatee kind of thing. So
it will be like the company that we saw in Shark Tank, which had the story of the artist who built the art for the T-shirt, and they would really show to which particular artist some percentage of the donation would go through, and they would put in a proper story of that guy. So we could really make the story of these recipes as to how did they come to it, what were their origins, and things like that, to properly produce the content in a better way that feels more connected.
Exactly, bro. And that's what I'm trying to do with DishTube. So welcome to love to chat with that is how to preserve those, but also how to share that forward. And in a way, you're done building a kind of an e-commerce type of thing, is where you can then help feed a family while you learn from their culture. You know what I mean? Then I'm also giving a part of me to another family and learning from that too. So I like that.
Yeah. I think there's like, so there's the, I feel like there's another group that we can end up targeting. So ultimately, like, if we end up, you know, the person can either pick up or drop off their food, give it to the co-ops, and this would help like more of the impoverished communities directly, right? But then when we're talking about the organic store side as well, usually, like Tanvi said, the people who shop at organic stores are the ones who are like more of the wealthier folks. So a way that organic stores can ultimately bridge the gap between having people who can afford their stores and then the people who can't, like typically people in low socioeconomic backgrounds, can't, like they, usually we hear stories of people going to fast food restaurants and people like shopping at Walmart or more low cost stores, but a way that organic stores can ultimately talk to or help the low socioeconomic people is with these coupons. So like the people who have low socioeconomic are like more of the impoverished communities, they're more incentivized to start thinking about their health, start thinking about ways that they can offer or provide for their children in healthier ways if those organic stores are now open to them. Maybe they will have to be led through an education process, and maybe they need to be trained in order to know a little bit more about health and the importance of it through this app. But I think getting them through the door will be offering them this tangible opportunity in the first place.
There's a guy, his name is, I don't know if you guys heard of Robert Egger. He was the founder of DC Central Kitchen 30 years ago. And then he started LA Central Kitchen and he retired. He actually lives in New Mexico. We had coffee like 2 weeks ago. And if you listen to his story, he talks about trying to get up the food chain. So, for example, they did a lot of food rescues and restaurants, and they want to give it away. But then also, how do you get up and help folks? And then he started getting homeless people and other folks employed by his kitchen. And then it's kind of a whole, the process that you kind of cycle in as this builds up. But that messaging up front is also interesting. Excuse me, I'll find the podcast back and I'll send it to you. But the thing I just shared is, I don't know if you've seen the social impact where, sorry, when someone drops off food, you could also give them that imagery. I think MasterCard has a way where, I don't know if you've seen the swipe where you swipe and there's a loaf of bread that kind of breaks off and someone takes it. So I'm just imagining when you're saying, like, when someone drops off of food, give them an imagery of what this is going toward, or maybe not necessarily a picture of a family for privacy and keeping that sacred, but a way to saying what it's actually doing, and being that also could be another cycle of that mindfulness of what you're throwing away can feed a family, you know what I mean, and provide them the resources they would need. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, yeah, so I feel like we threw out a bunch of ideas here, but let's create the chain in our head just so we know what is the next step, right? So ultimately, what I've written down is that, like, number one, instead of putting our food in the trash, we create an app where people can scan their barcodes of that particular food, and then people can either have someone pick up that food, or they can drop it off at their local co-op, and then we give the food to the co-op, and then this can directly help people in more impoverished communities, right? On the other hand, like, one way that we incentivize people is providing virtual coupons or virtual money to incentivize people to bring them in, and the coupons can be applied to your local organic store. That organic store can ultimately bridge the gap between low socioeconomic groups and people who can afford their services, bringing both groups together in order to create more of like a healthy community and environment. Also, there are different ways to scale as well, as in we can offer, like, especially not only for our canned foods but even for our cooked foods, are like moms and like that group ultimately the ones who are typically like creating their own recipes, especially based off of their own cultures. We can either share their recipes, offer them opportunities of employment with us, just to even bridge the cultural gap as well. And I think, yeah, so like ultimately we're closing the loop. But ultimately, the outcome is helping low socioeconomic groups, but also offering employment to those who are already in this space from the very beginning. Does this sound like a relatively okay summary?
So, what's interesting to me is, from a scaling standpoint, is this a Roger? You've got the best poker face, by the way, bro. So I can't really see if you're liking this or not. So just please, I know you're taking a lot of notes on it. So I'm just adjust me as need be, as well as Shivani and other team members. So when Rachel did her master's, my wife, she went to the elders on the tribe, and their whole thing was there's a living history of what these folks have in their memory banks, and they tell via stories of how things were, and then they took those basically data points and these, and remember the following time, like the river dried up, or the following time the sheep did this, or the following time whatever it was, and then they took these these basically climate change events and stuff like that, and they married them up and said, oh, this matches from this history that these guys are talking about. What I'm also wondering is the lift just being having a database memory bank, an instant, like a ancestry of how different family members and folks preserve food, rescue food, what their stories were, how they did it. Could that be a learning lesson to be applied forward as how it goes? And is that being done? And that brings in the inclusion factor of now you going out and talking to the grandmas and the grandpas and the aunts and uncles, and having the repository of, because I think that knowledge is going away. And we're maybe in a way trying to recreate the process, but just having that stories and the way they did it, and the multimedia that went involved with it, might be a good start. And not only are you learning, teaching that forward, but you're also not losing the art of it, and then that could be customized with folks. I mean, that alone, I think the capturing, how do you put the multimedia factor in it, and what part of the world it came from, what the methods were, and that's a use case in itself. And that's an easier lift at this level maybe than trying to go ahead and logistics and food banks and who's going to cover what and costing. But I think that history capture is in itself might have some value, and it's much more scalable and an easier lift. I don't know.
I really like that idea. Today I was looking at different solutions, and one of them was, okay, how do you preserve your lettuce, for instance? And some people said, oh, you leave it out, you put it in the fridge. And then the third, this is just a very small example, the lettuce is a living, thing. You put it in water and it'll preserve better. So to me, that was shocking. I said, wow, I never thought about that. I thought about putting lettuce in water, that it would preserve better, I put in the fridge. So I think to your point, I don't know if this is someone's ancestral solution from the past, but it definitely sparked interest when you were speaking of putting all this information somewhere so that people can access existing creative ways to prevent food from going bad in the first place, or not from going bad completely, but extending its life. And there's another article I read stating that the longer we can preserve food, the less food waste there will be. So this is looking at it from the point of, let's get to some of the roots. So I really like that idea. And also the including people from the past, because a lot of times I find that younger people, we don't give credit enough to those who have come before us that help spark these ideas. Or maybe we do, and I'm just not knowledgeable about that. So I like it because it's going in the route of not appropriating ideas. And to Tanvi's point of creating an app might be ways for younger audiences, or actually many people can use apps now, but there is a segment of the population that can't. So it would be interesting if we could also partner. So the app would be very helpful because it can scale. It's scalable, I feel. And it's probably the harder part would be partnering with people. And I think, DC Central Kitchen, I'm glad Puya mentioned, I was thinking about that organization, would be a great organization to partner with, who paved the way and knocked on doors trying to get some food that was left over. And it was difficult. So it will give us a realistic understanding of what is possible and how, and also maybe we can help them as well. And to the inclusion point, sorry, I'm talking so much.
No.
There was one thing I really liked. DC Central Kitchen, there's a employee from DC Central Kitchen, or he was an intern at the time, that wrote a book about the organization. And one of the things I absolutely love that I don't see enough in social impact organizations, charity organizations, is this mindset shift that we are helping people that are in need of some X thing, whether it's food or whether it's something else. And DC Central Kitchen kind of puts that generalization or that assumption to its head by saying, you know what, our people that we are serving can actually be your teachers. They can teach you how to create recipes. They train them in culinary arts or in cooks and something like that, and they train volunteers. So as volunteers are coming in to help make food, they're also realizing, wow, like I'm learning from them, and they're probably more, financially stable or something. They're thinking, wow, I have something to learn from people, no matter where they are in life, whatever happened in the past. Like, I'm not here to save anyone. Like, we're here to help each other, and that is a purposeful experience that the leaders created, so that volunteers can also have an epiphany, because it's that mindset that if I have more, now I have to help. But if we all learn from each other, then we include everyone and everyone's voices. And I think there are also people that receive donations that could also learn. I mean, my aunt receives canned food and donations, and she wastes a lot of food. So I think we all can learn, and we all can also teach others. My mom used to receive some kind of help in the past, and she is not a food waster. She knows a lot of tips. So maybe she's someone to give tips, like you were saying. So I think there's something there in including people's voices, and all of people's voices, not only the people giving.
Mm-hmm.
No, thank you for sharing that and actually helping me think that through. Is that it's always, it says how to think. It's very important, and I think this, to your point, and what we're talking about is how to think, is also just as important, because you can go ahead and capture and rescue as much donated food and everything else that you do. What's interesting is I walked into our Safeway before we moved out here in DC, and literally rows were all redone, and more packaged food and more boxes and more things were there. and the produce section and the fresh food was lessened and lessened and lessened, because that's what there's a, I don't know if you folks heard of like HelloFresh or the other one, the one where they order the food, Blue Apron. They actually try to scale that in the supermarkets, but the challenge was they couldn't preserve that food. So we will necessarily gravitate more towards that packaged food and those things that are shelved longer, and also bring on more food waste. But maybe in our way, we can go and interview and have the messages some folks. I mean, I just sent Shivani an email, and the reason I'm sending to you, Shivani, because I don't want to spam everyone, and please disseminate as you see fit, is the history of the refrigerator goes back centuries, how it was, why it was brought on and stuff. And the same token is, if we can capture these best practices and archive them somewhere, where people could go ahead and tap into them, like the Yumly style of okay, I want to make the following, whatever, but like, how do you preserve, like you said, the lettuce? What are the best practices? And you have that, advice from someone. It's almost like a Wikipedia of sorts that you're creating, and the lift isn't that high now. How you capture and where you put it and how you do it, but I would wonder is people's contributions be very fascinating. So
Yeah, that's true. I think you all raised like some really good points that like help us think somewhat beyond this app. And ultimately, I feel like we just need to have a starting point somewhere, and then as we move forward, we can catalyze more systems of change. So I want to transition over to Roger and see like, okay, what do you think from the startup standpoint? What's next steps, execution mode, the whole shebang?
All right, so I also took a whole bunch of notes on everything, and it's all in that Trello board that Shivani invited everyone to. So if you want to open that up, you'll hopefully see a nice a bunch of notes on what we did. If you open up each card, I pretty much wrote down everything everybody.
Roger, can you share your screen just in case some people aren't able?
Sure, okay.
Thank you.
Let's see how. Share screen. There we go. All right, let's do this. Okay, can everybody see the board?
yeah.
All right, great. So on here, and when you get a chance, you can check it out. I've got the Trello board, for instance. Here's everything we were talking about. So this is the Trello board. I use this whenever we're building new applications or any kind of projects or companies with new clients. I've pretty much written down almost everything everybody said. So, for example, if I open up this card here, here's there's notes on what everybody was talking about, almost from more of a stream of consciousness thing. We can all review that at our own pace. We have here what we call the cocktail party conversation. So if we were just describing this to people quickly, these are the three things that I would kind of pick out to talk about. I'll let you read that over. Here's all the people that we're working with, marketing strategies, and we can talk about that more in a second. Business development, people we're going to cold call, and we mentioned the DC Central Kitchen and a variety of others. And then a whole bunch of app features over here, which came from the discussion. And once you get into Trello, you can go in there, pull them up, and comment on each of them or add your own or stuff like that. Just based on what I've heard so far, there's two places I'd want to start. One is I think that living history of food piece is just really easy. We can get that launched quickly and start pushing that to people. Be like, hey, come share your living history with food or old recipes and stuff. That stuff's really easy. There's a bunch of stuff like that that's out there. Yumly's doing it from one perspective. Epicurious is doing it from another perspective. We can come into it from a social justice perspective, and that makes sense, which flows into the marketing aspect in terms of how we would try to drive people to the website to share their various stories. So we will need somebody to take over the Instagram, Facebook dynamic, Twitter, Snapchat, LinkedIn, and just see how we can drive people to the site so we can start taking their living histories of food. So that's one aspect of it, really easy to put together, and we can launch that in a few days. I love this thing about the DC Central Kitchen. The best way to build applications is to find somebody out there in the world who is in the middle of, who's like doing this stuff live that we're all kind of talking about, and then see if we can come in and help them by building them an app, for example. So if we would go to the DC Central Kitchen and say, hey, you know, we're a group of students, we're students and professionals, and we're doing a project for the MIT thing, and we'd like to build, you know, you all an application that would help solve whatever problems that you're having. You know, we'd love to do that, and then submit that to the MIT group. So if we can get them on board, we'll learn a lot about the challenges that they're facing with, which goes to all this other stuff, the pantry storage, shared, you know, reading the SKUs, pick up the food, this listing of food banks. We'll find out which of those are priorities and which would be most helpful to the DC Central Kitchen. Whatever they need, we basically build for them, deliver that solution to them, which gets us a whole bunch of great marketing, which we can then take to marginalized communities to get more of them on board, and then start building in a variety of these other features on top of the success that we're having with the DC Central Kitchen. And then hopefully a variety of other food banks will come to us as well and say, hey, we'd love you to build for us. And all of a sudden we start scaling to multiple different outlets who are going to be using this platform. And then we adjust the platform to a scaled model away from what we learned in the DC Central Kitchen model. So there's overall two aspects that we can go after this. One is building just a nice big community on there with the living food thing. I think that's really cool. And then the other one, if we can close it, is getting into the DC Central Kitchen and saying, hey, we want to build you something that's part of a project that we're doing, and we'd love to work with you on it.
Just in terms of next steps, I know that we're running out of time. I mean, actually, we're out of time. But I wanted to get a head count of people who are interested into taking this into execution mode. So there are a couple of different ways you can participate. One is helping. So I think Impaction and anyone else who wants to help out, Impaction, we will definitely be submitting the report to MIT Solve by July 1st. So anyone who wants to help with writing the proposal with us can participate in that way. Second is actually building out like the application, whatever, the website, whatever it is that we're planning on doing. Like Roger said, just getting something simple up to get just people thinking about ways we can take this forward. That's another way. The third is just being a part of planning discussions. If you just don't have time, but you would like to offer your thoughts and see how this evolves, then if everyone wants to, we can schedule meetings on the calendar like once every 2 weeks or something, and see where everyone's head is at and which direction we're going towards. So that's another way. And then just fourth is just emailing me directly. And ultimately just being in the loop about what we're doing. So we will have like progress reports and see what things are coming up. But I think everyone did share their ideas in one shape or form. And I think either way, even if you don't have time, it would be cool to see how your ideas are having impact in like this execution mode that we're working towards. So there are different ways to run, but yeah, thank you everyone for this. And I'm excited to get this started.